Welcome to episode 180 of thenecronama.com.
You know that feeling when you're searching for a new horror book, but you're just being stared down by a wall of Stephen King? We're trying to change that. We're Butcher Cabin Books, a new horror-focused bookstore giving shelf space to indie horror writers. Don't worry, we still carry King, but he's quarantined to his own section. Learn more at horrorbookstore.com, where you can buy books online along with merch and mystery boxes. Or you can visit us in person in Louisville, Kentucky, where we're open year-round.
If you're looking to start your own podcast, you should check out Libsyn.com and get up to 2 months of free podcasting service when you use our code NECRO, all caps, NECRO. Libsyn provides you with great customer service and support. They have real-time podcast analytics, free podcast guides and tutorials, and everything else you'll need to get started podcasting today. Go to libsyn.com and enter the promo code NECRO today, and check out thenecronama.com wherever you listen to podcasts. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now. And we are audio only with no video because we all have buttons for eyes and there's no reason to watch anything. Don has mysteriously disappeared and not shown up today. I don't know where he is. Maybe he'll show up during the episode. Maybe he won't. Maybe he crawled through a little door in his house. I don't know where he is. He could be anywhere. So it's just me and our wonderful guest, Ira Marcks. Ira, thank you for joining the show today, man.
Hi. Thanks for having me, James.
Absolutely. At least 2 of us showed up. No.
Say anything. Never met the dude, so.
Oh, that's even more fun. Just take random shots at him. Like, maybe they won't even be true. Just be like, that's why he's so short. You know, like, it's fine. Whatever. Now, so why don't you tell our listeners a bit about yourself, man?
Yeah. Well, I'm a graphic novelist. I guess that's a term people use. I'm a cartoonist, fundamentally. So I make middle grade graphic novels for young readers. And I think that's going to kind of speak to the themes we're going to get at here today. But I'm currently working on a series of graphic novels for young readers they're kind of Scooby-Doo inspired mystery stories with these puzzles in the center of them. And the gimmick with the series that each book is inspired by my love for a particular film. So the first book in the series is called Shark Summer, and it's about some kids on the island of Martha's Vineyard in the summer of 1974, making a documentary while Spielberg is there making Jaws at the same time. So it's kind of a behind the scenes, full of Easter eggs type of island mystery adventure. And the second book in the series just came out time of this recording. It's called Spirit Week, and that follows the character Elijah from Shark Summer as he travels to the Colorado Rocky Mountains to a particular infamous hotel with a cranky writer, we could say, who lives there. Obviously, I'm talking about The Shining. And we kind of explore in an alternative reality where the Overlook Hotel is called the Underlook Hotel. And there's kind of it's like, what if Stephen King never left that hotel and never got famous in the same way he actually got famous? So, and I'm working on the third book in that series now. So if those sort of deep thinking on movies you love and kind of integrating kid-friendly mystery adventure stories, a la Scooby-Doo is your thing, you might enjoy my books. So that's me.
Excellent. I had the pleasure of reading both. Thank you for sending them to me. And as you know, we did the fundraiser at the Stanley this year, and I was like, man, I wish this book had been out when we did this, because this would have been such a great tie-in. I read them with my 7-year-old, and we just absolutely loved them, and I highly suggest everybody check them out. And the best part to me is it's got that same thing Scooby-Doo has, and I was going to say that, so I'm so glad you brought that up. But where, like, no matter what age I am, I still love Scooby-Doo. Like, it's not like, oh, I outgrew this at some point. And your books have that same feel. They have that, it doesn't matter how old you are, they're still super fun. If anything, I think they're probably better if you're older. I'm biased, of course, but because you get the Easter eggs and the weird things happening going on. So I think it's fantastic.
That's really, I appreciate those points specifically. And I think that's going to speak to the movie I picked to talk about today. That kind of idea, the pursuit of kind of a story that can feel timeless, even though it can be extremely specific in certain ways. I think that's such like an important thing for a kid's book to try to pull off for, I think so. That's nice. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I loved it. I hope people check it out. The first book is fantastic as well, but obviously the Stanley's been a little bit on my mind this year. So
I honestly couldn't believe my editor kind of let me choose that movie, because the first one was an easy sell with like the Jaws thing. It's like,
yeah,
okay, everybody knows what Jaws is. Kids like have seen Jaws or they're too scared to watch it, which is even better. And then when she was like, all right, what are you going to do for the sequel? She's like, why don't you do Goonies? I'm like, I'm not going to do Goonies. What if we did The Shining? She's like, okay.
Well, if she wants to do a Saw, let me know. I'll help you out.
Right. Yeah, when's like the Eli Roth kind of offshoot, hostile kind of flavor.
Yeah,
kids love that stuff. It's coming back sooner than later anyway. All that.
Absolutely.
Torture porn, is that back yet? I don't follow horror that closely.
It's getting there. It's not quite on that level, but yeah, things are bloody like usual.
But I just feel like torture porn type of stuff is just sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit, but which makes me think that it's due for a resurgence here pretty soon. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's like actually a lot of it out there that I'm missing.
There's probably more than I know, because I swear I'm usually just watching whatever we're doing on the show because I'm so busy with everything else. But so everybody out there can feel free to tweet us, tell us what to watch. Mm-hmm. But yeah, everything's cyclical. It'll come back and be crazy again. Yeah. But they already did a kids version, which was Willy Wonka. Let's get into this film though. Why did you pick this film particularly?
Okay, so I picked Coraline, if you hadn't read the text on your podcast app right now. And I think you already said that anyway. My brain is recording.
I might have. I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows what we've said so far? Yeah. So Coraline, I feel like Coraline has become a cornerstone of like creepy young reader. The whole genre. I feel like so many authors that are working today, that are, kind of my age, like 30s, late 30s, 40s, found this book in this movie at a time where they were kind of like developing their own voice. So it's just the timing seems right, where Coraline is just this fundamental aspect of like spooky kid literature in film. So it just seemed like the perfect one to kind of pick, because there's so many ways to look at this movie, and the adaptation angle and the Neil Gaiman-ness of it all. It just seemed like I actually couldn't believe you hadn't done it yet.
I mean, neither can I.
Yeah. Other than you don't kind of dive into stuff with like 12-year-old protagonists as often as you do adult fare. But yeah, so I'm just really excited to talk about it. And I think while my books, I don't feel like they're dark fantasy in the same way Coraline is at all, there are some thematic aspects that I definitely try to work into the stories I tell.
Very cool. Yeah, I think you kind of hit it when you were saying like we all kind of watched it at that point where we were trying to find ourselves and find our own voices. And I think that says so much about this film in itself, because we've all been that person who thinks there's something out there better than what we currently have. And that never goes away, no matter what age you are. The grass is always greener somewhere. But it's so specifically teenage of, I need out of this house. There's something else. And every one of us, or at least most of us, have moved out of the house and had at least a couple minutes of, man, I had it better than I thought, or right. Not always. There's abusive families and whatever else. There's exceptions, but generalized, like this really hits that. The be careful what you wish for, and the illusion of what we think we're getting.
Right. There's like the term, the coming of age story that we hear across all types of genres. And I feel like particularly here, that coming of age is about, like you're saying, that illusion, that perception of yourself, of your parents, of new friends that you're meeting if you move, and just sort of the world at large and what other people's backstories and what buildings, houses backstories are. It all just kind of, I think that's why I love, and I've leaned into horror, like mystery, not darker horror, but like mystery-ish horror as a genre for stories I want to tell, because it's so good at speaking to these ideas. Like, I think most of my favorite coming of age stories, like, they have an element of dark horrorness to them, like a Something Wicked This Way Comes, like a Ray Bradbury thing, like adding the darkness of the horror genre, like the tropes that you're given when you play in that space. It just makes for such good kid storytelling. Like it always has, right? Like, what are fairy tales if not like, early horror, right?
Oh, especially the actual fairy tales versus the Disneyized versions.
And that bringing up that point, that kind of like that line between Disney kid fare and then other stuff. Coraline was, while I was around 20 when this came out. Now, actually, the book came out in 2002. I can't remember what year the movie came out exactly. I think it's more of a 2009. Yeah. Okay. So Coraline, the movie, I feel like it was one of those things that seemed to elude the Disney-ness of kid stuff. And I think that's what makes it so special. I love Disney, and there's many masterpieces in that canon, but there's something about the sort of Neil Gaiman and Tim Burton and Henry Selick that is such an alternate reality to what Disney wants to the way Disney speaks to kids. And I think there's something like, I don't know if it's an authenticity or what exactly, but it seems cleaned, or it seems more raw, like when you watch a Coraline than when you watch a Disney movie, because there's just like that amount of space in there. And it's sometimes the way they use silence, or the way the music kind of leaves room for you to feel uncomfortable or something. We'll get into that more, I guess, like these things I'm trying to pull out from my brain, having never actually talked about this movie. But
well, I think that's, you have free reign. You can jump into them now if you want. You can come back, whatever you want to do.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on that point. The way Coraline kind of distinguishes itself as a different type, to me, a more literary type of kids movie. Partly because it's adapted, but it's not adapted in the Disney way, where it becomes like a safe space almost. Like Coraline feels weird and dangerous in a way like a Disney movie doesn't.
Well, I mean, I even feel like it doesn't hit the beats the same way. Like all movies hit the beats. You kind of have to. That's the industry. But it doesn't hit them in the exact way Disney films do. When I watch Disney, I feel like I'm watching Disney. And there's not as much stuff that feels like it was put there because we can make toys out of it or things like that.
Right. It's kind of got like the concept art that led to this movie is very distinct. And even though you can see a little bit of Disney in some of the design, there's like interesting little choices along the way. So like, for example, just thinking of like the opening of the movie, the soundtrack. So originally the music was all supposed to be done by that band, They Might Be Giants, which if you're not familiar, is kind of like,
oh, wow,
from the 90s. And there's one They Might Be Giants song left in the movie. It's when the dad's playing the piano and the piano starts playing itself, and the dad is subtly singing in that nasal voice of like the They Might Be Giants guy. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did not. That's awesome.
So, but Harry Selick, at some point, while they had written a whole bunch of songs, he pulled that, and then he brought in a French composer. What's his name? It's like Bruno Coulai. I don't know. I'm bad with names. But he does this thing where if you listen, it's all kind of like mumbly, like gibberish kid choir music. It's supposed to sound like a little like Frenchy-ish, but it's just not. It's just total gibberish. And it's like, what a distinction. This would be a totally different movie if it was a They Might Be Giants soundtrack and not this weird like kid choir.
God, like there's part of me that wants to hear that, and part of me that's like that would have taken away some of the stuff I love. I don't know. Interesting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's something about it being so like it almost feels kind of Danny Elfman and in the Nightmare Before Christmas way a little bit, but it's just a little weirder and darker.
No, I just watched Wendell and Wild. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it's Selleck's new movie. And it feels very much the same with some of that stuff. Just the allowing a little more rope so it's not as safe, and just really diving into some themes that people don't always hit. We did an episode on it, so anyone out there can listen to it. Having watched this right after watching that, I saw so much more connection, and it made me really think about how Selleck does things differently than like Disney, for instance, or Pixar, or these different places, and just that little the little tweaks towards horror and really hitting fear, like not in the Saw bloody way, not in that kind of stuff, but age appropriate fear. I know that you know Laura Senf as well. I would love to see the Clackety done by Selleck. Like I think that he could hit that book so beautifully. I don't know. So I was thinking about that a lot, just how his style just really kind of goes over a couple paces from where everything I'm used to is. And when you say it's not as clean or shined up or however you said it exactly, man, you really just hit it on the head. It's just that little bit allowing us to fear things. And I wish that more places did that.
Yeah, it's like, I think, I don't know how to kind of, I think it's, I think people's relationship with horror, especially in the kids genre, is expanding. I think for a long time, I don't know if it's like the satanic panic of the 80s or what happened, that adults became really afraid of kind of like fantasy and dark tales, and putting them in front of kids as if they're going to be like some weird Pandora's box and not just be about the same things as any other good story. But I feel like we're coming away from that, and it's like we're becoming more horror literate as a culture, because the tropes are being like snuck into things. Like something like, obviously, like Stranger Things, that show gets darker and darker with each season. Not necessarily better, but like darker and darker to the point where like young kids are finding that and they're just putting it on, and suddenly they're like watching the same type of like Nightmare on Elm Street type of stuff that would have been like a little taboo when we were kids, So I think just horror is becoming like, we're opening our minds to it a little more, like culturally, and which makes Coraline kind of like the new Pinocchio or something, in a way, like, because it's darker than something like Nightmare Before Christmas to me, because it doesn't have the music. When you take the musical element out of it, I would say that it makes this movie feel like a lot more grounded. And like you were saying, with the that idea that there's a realism to it, like the movie kind of opens with a hint of a backstory of how there's been a car accident in the family and the mother has a neck brace on. And if you look at the car, there's a crack across the driver's side hood. And Coraline is like, it wasn't my fault. Like you quickly get a sense that these people have existed in a dangerous real life world where people get in car accidents and hurt their necks in a way that wouldn't happen in another animated feature. You know what I mean? Like that right there just feels dark, and the potential for danger is just there right from the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think just one of the other things that really sticks out to me is before we get too into social commentary and stuff, I'm fascinated with this film and the book, in that I feel like they're both, no offense to Gaiman, no offense to Selleck, they're both incomplete without the other. And what I mean by that is the book is fantastic, but we lose the visual. We lose this world that's so different and interesting. And in the book, the world is kind of basically the same. And we lose that excitement factor that the visual gives us with going crazy. But in the movie, we lose Gaiman and his mastery of language, and it's there, but it's not, you know? And so my question for you as an illustrator, should this have been a graphic novel so that we could have all of that in one?
Well, it actually is a graphic novel. I've never read it.
Really?
Hold on.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot more recently, though. But in the way, kind of, if you look around, everything is just getting adapted into a graphic novel, especially like public domain stuff. But I would say, you know, no offense to P. Craig Russell, who did the illustrations on the graphic novel for Coraline, which, I don't know, to me, the art style like doesn't speak to the story in the same way. It's kind of clean in graphic novel-y in the way, I'm trying to think of a book that looks like this a little bit. This is sort of similar. Like, have you read the Lock and Key books, like the Joe Hill?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It looks a little like that in that the architecture is all very clean and highly rendered, and the characters are very like humanistic. Whereas like the cartoon, the animated feature is so kind of 50s designy abstract. It's like almost, it's got kind of, feels like it was like pulled from like Mary Blair concept art in a way. And I feel like that adds an emotional level to the animated film that the graphic novel just isn't trying to do. It's trying to be a lot more realistic. Like, what's his name? The neighbor and Mr. Babinski. Like in the graphic novel, it's just an older man, the white mustache and like a cap and a coat. He's not like this big kind of bowling pin character that's a blue, you know, it makes it totally different. And for me, emotionally, I definitely connect with the animated film. And like you're saying, it just pairs with the novel so well. Because I do remember reading it in 2002. I wasn't super into Neil Gaiman before this. Like I remember trying to read the Sandman graphic novels, and I was kind of into them, but they were so like metaphorical and big fantasy that it just was never like my thing. I like more grounded stories. So by the time, I don't know if he was having kids around this time exactly, but I liked this in like a graveyard book, like the stories that become more earthbound and they become a lot smaller. I like those Neil Gaiman stories. And this is kind of the definitive one for me. It's such a small little story. I just love that. That it doesn't try to do too much, you know?
So basically, while talking about a movie with one of the main themes being careful what you wish for, I was dumb enough to wish for a graphic novel only to have my hopes shattered.
I mean, I bet it's good. It's just, I think because I illustrate, I instantly respond to how the art is done. And if it doesn't suit what I think, it sometimes takes me a long time to come around. Like even something like Watchmen, I didn't read for years because I'm like, I don't like those drawings. I don't like the color palette. But now, you know, I can be like, oh, Watchmen is very good because of the way they've done it. So yeah, please read the Coraline graphic novel and support graphic novels.
Absolutely. No, I'm going to check it out, but I will still always wish that I could combine this art style with Gaiman's writing into one. Talk about your all-time backfires. Anyway.
Actually, you know what? I want to talk about before we meet any of the characters, that opening kind of first-person shot where we see the other mother's hands just working. There's something, I think a reason I resonate with this movie really well is there's something that feels very 90s goth about it. There's something that feels like very, do you know the Brothers Quay who did like some of the Tool music videos from the 90s? You know, that stop motion stuff, the like really grimy, small figures that would be like wound in thread and wire, very like kind of Nine Inch Nails, early Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah,
feeling.
I know the videos. I don't know who made them, but yes.
But this opening feels like that, and I think that instantly attunes me with the really angular pointiness of everything. The way there's so much shadow play and that kind of cinematic language in these. It completely lacks what becomes the Disney appeal, the soft roundness, the big Bambi eyes. Everything feels pointier and sharper and like crickety-er, you know, like uncomfortable in its like geometric shapes. And I feel like that opening it just conveys so much of that with the soundtrack. And we also get to some of the themes, like instantly that also speak to kind of, I feel like the medium, like to me, this is kind of a big thought idea that I have with all like narrative arts is like the creators behind them are always speaking to their challenges as trying to find their voice in their own medium. So we get this scene where like two hands are making a puppet and the struggle of that and like the fine tuning of something to bring it to life. There's like this movie is about like stop motion in a way, kind of in the way like so many books are about the importance of like books. So I just love that opening, and it kind of doing something like that makes a movie like this feel kind of timeless in a different way, in the way it kind of defines what we think of when we think of stop motion. Like Coraline is probably the first movie that pops to mind, like her crawling through that tunnel, that kind of like bioluminescent tunnel. That's what I think of when I think of the idea of stop motion. I don't know where your brain goes with stop motion, but this movie is like definitively stop motion for me at this point.
I would say being me, I don't pay as much attention to it, and I haven't really thought about it. But you used the word uncomfortable when you talked about how they're built. And that like just resonated with me when you said it. I was like, wow, I've never considered that, but it's so true. And I was thinking about Wendell and Wild as well, because they kind of have that going on as well. And yeah, that's such a good term for it. As far as the rest, I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that, but but no, I love how stop motion makes me feel. Like it's not the same as full animation. And there's something about it that I can't put into words well, that when I watch it, it automatically like raises that unsettled feeling in me. And that whole, we were talking about like the two steps aside from Disney, right? It really hypes up those feelings and makes me feel like everything's weird. The real world's weird. The places we go are weird. Like, but it somehow physically encapsulates that for me. And that's true for any stop motion I've ever seen, going back to the old Davy and Goliath or whatever that was when I was a kid, and stuff today. I always get that unsettled feeling, and I've never thought about why until now. So that's awesome.
The way stop motion kind of integrates itself in other films, like Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, or like Jason and the Argonauts, the way you don't think you're watching an animated feature, but then here's a scene that feels totally different and weird. And when you're a kid, you might not be able to parse that it's like kind of, two mediums coming together. But then when you're older, you're like, oh, stop motion has kind of always been around as in effect, like in a way to create an illusion in the same way, like CGI eventually kind of fills that role in cinema. That magic of like the stop motion, being able to see, like, for example, the cat in Coraline, you can see its fur shifting because the people's hands have pressed on it. So like, even when the cat's moving on its own, it's doing its own thing. It's alive in its own way. But then on top of that, you can see its fur just reacting to those moments in between the shots where somebody's touched it. So you're never not without this sensation that people had a literal hand in this piece. And it makes it feel more, I don't know, more like an art form that's showing you behind the scenes instead of creating a full on magic trick. There's something like always very revealing about stop motion, and that it doesn't, the illusion isn't complete in the way like an animated, like cell drawn feature is or something, does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And it's crazy how that ties into Coraline's story as well. You said this is kind of a movie about stop motion movies as well. And as you're describing this, like, this is all stuff I had not considered at all. So I'm rambling and being crazy. But as you're explaining it, and I'm really kind of paying attention to it now, it's amazing how that does reflect in the other world as well as her regular world, but especially the other world, how things are constantly wrong and very choppy and puppet mastered by by the other mom.
Right, exactly. I think that's what adds that layer to the Neil Gaiman story. Like, so, so this whole idea of the other world and like traveling into the space and the way the other mother is designed and the way she puppets is like, it's a visual style. And then, but when you read that in the Neil Gaiman book, it kind of like comes across in a different way because you're kind of taking this like third person limited perspective on the story. Like somebody is kind of telling you Coraline's story. And it just feels like a very different approach to a similar set of themes. And the cool thing I think is that why they seem so locked together as I think the people making the film really understood the book, and the book is very clear in what it's about. And it's also short. So it kind of lends itself to, a feature length film, even though this is shorter than like most movies. But I think that all kind of helps it. Like all the stuff that we're kind of hinting at, like these ideas of perception, the way we see it in like the mirrors or the buttons or like in the tea leaves or even in the clouds or even in like the lightning. There's like a shot of lightning that just looks like a gnarly hand. And there's so much discussion about like how we see things, all this like coming of age stuff, that when you interpret that through visuals instead of through prose, it's just a whole nother thing that's awakening in you. Like the visual metaphors, they're different. They're not like stronger necessarily than prose, but they're different and they add to like the bigger picture that is like the Coraline story.
Definitely. And it also plays into another one of the themes, which is the power of imagination. And it is such a great representation of imagination to me. I was reading online, some people think like none of this even happened to Coraline. It was like in her head how she's dealing with like these neglectful parents, and so she's building this other world, but like all this stuff. And I don't buy into that, but I like where the thought process is. And this thing that's building this other world for her is imagination as well. And it's imagining what she would want in order to be trapped there, right? And what it needs to offer her. And I really like how everything you're saying right now pulls into that imagination part, and how that goes deeper into artists and writers and whoever else trying to figure out what we want to be captured in a film, right? And to be pulled into that world. And I just find all of that whole theme of trying to build things that others want and trying to find out what we want and all of that together is just beautiful. And again, I hadn't really considered any of this till we started talking, but I love where this is going. So
it kind of iterates, the story iterates on like the Wizard of Oz theme in a way. But this also feels timeless in its own way. And there's something that feels a little more relatable with this. I think it's just like Neil Gaiman being a more relatable storyteller, and like the little things in Coraline's like character, things that, the idea that like this could be a dream. I feel like when people say that, it's kind of trolly, but it's also like the important things about her story could just exist psychologically or in the real world is like my take on that, because like little stuff that kind of endears you to her, like her name. She points out like very quickly that it's not Caroline, like the obvious choice. Like you're just sort of washing over who I am instantly by guessing my name. My wife has this problem. Her name is Maura, and she spells it Maura. So if you're on the phone with like tech assistants, they're always like, yeah, Laura, let me help you. And she just leaves it most of the time, because what are you going to do? What's the point of standing up with the stranger to like get your name right? But in a way, like, because when you see that name on the book, you're like, oh, it's no, it's Coraline. Is that a name? I guess clearly it's a name. It's her name. Have I ever heard that name before? It just kind of plants this whole sense of like your perception of somebody right off the bat from just that simple, little line. And that's something that I think is so Neil Gaiman prosy, is that little thing with the word, because there's other little there's just some like wordplay stuff that's always going on with this story that's so good. And then bringing that other layer through the visuals and the whole sense of like the otherworldliness, the misperception of things. It's all there also in the visuals. And I think that's it dances, like the story, the film is dancing like with the book, I think, in the way it's pulling the important stuff and using like the strong points.
Oh, absolutely. And with her name, one of my favorite things is that on a lot of the posters, the O in Coraline is a button.
Yeah.
And so I like how that ties in. It's been replaced. The button actually makes it look even more like Caroline. And I think that that's such a fantastic little touch. I don't know which artist decided that or who, but great job.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't even thought about that part. You know what I had thought of, though, and this is like maybe a little more hidden in there. When they present, she's in the other world and the other mother presents her the welcome home cake. And there's like if you look at, I'm very into typography because I like make fonts, for my books and stuff. So I always like notice lettering, and I'm always trying to look to see when stuff's handwritten. And the nice thing about stop motion is everything is made by hand. So there is no like automated font. So with that lettering, the O in home has these two weird loops. So I had to I'm like, that's got to be a thing. That's too odd. And you look it up and I don't remember where I read this, but someone declared if you study handwriting, if somebody makes that extra loop in the front half of the O, it means they're lying or they're like writing the wrong name. I'm like, ooh, there's another weird O thing going on right there.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Hello? You guys okay? I just got in from my other house. Like I was just fighting this weird spider chick with needle hands and stuff.
Wow.
So
that sounds intense. We're glad you made it.
She wanted to sew buttons to my eyes. I don't know what the hell's going on.
You have beautiful eyes. Don't let her do that.
I know. I don't want her to get jealous of my eyes. I hear that's a thing.
So we're about 38 minutes in. We've covered some stuff, but we'll just jump in. At the beginning, I made fun of you not being here, and I said that you might be opening a small door and climbing through it. So it's really funny that you entered with that.
Yeah, it really does all come together.
Well, you know what's funny is I have a small door in my house.
Oh, man.
So, yes, I will send you a picture of it so we can use it as part of the promo stuff.
The way the mom just cuts that wallpaper without a second thought, I would never mess with my house that way. Like, the kid can find something else to do. My version of the story would, if I was her parent, it would have ended right there. I'm like, you're not going to play with this.
Well, I don't know.
Stays back.
I don't know. These parents don't really seem to give a damn. It's kind of like, it's like, Coraline, just go play in this other dimension. It's like, we actually know what's over there. We just want to get rid of you.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
And she comes and tells them as well. So they definitely know something weird's happening. I don't like those little doors. They always creep me out in houses. So I would be with Ira on this, and you're not opening that door. I'd be like moving a bookcase in front of it. Like, no. Mm-mm.
Right. It gives you a little of that, like Alice in Wonderland type of feeling, like right away. I was also against Alice going to Wonderland as well. Don, we were just talking about in the title Coraline, how in the movie poster, the O has a button over it. And there's this whole thing right off the bat in the book, in the movie, where people always think her name is Caroline and not Coraline. So I have to ask you, is the O in your name a button? And do people think your name is Dan a lot also?
No, but people have thought I was David.
Oh,
really?
Yeah. It was the weirdest thing. Like, that was the most common name that people called me when they didn't get my name right. It was David. I have no idea. I don't look like a David. I don't look like a Don either. Like most Davids, nothing against Davids. Just, I don't know. It seems like
not
David,
all Davids.
Not all Davids. It just seems like David has a certain sound and look to it. If you're a guy named Tristan, you better be like a sexy, hunky guy with like blonde hair who, tries to steal his brother's wife.
Right. That's what
Now we know where you really were.
That's
So Don, since you have no idea what we talked about outside of the button, what's in your notes? I'm fascinated by what's in your notes. And then if you start talking about something we've already done, I'm just going to yell, "No, too late." All right.
No, I'll still talk about it. I've done this, talked about this with you before, as far as when I watch certain movies, especially if it's kids movies or kid geared movies, kid focused movies, I have my kid watch it with me to see exactly what her impressions are, what she'll like, what doesn't work, and things like that. And my daughter turned into my mom with respect to the way that she interacts with the movie. And I made jokes. Like there's this one part with the dogs, right? Forgot what time, whether it's Scotty's or something like that. And Coraline goes to the other world or the other house, or goes to through the esophagus or the intestinal tract or whatever it is. It was just a weird
looking door.
It was a weird visual when she was crawling through it. It's like being rebirthed. So going through the birth canal into the other house. Mm-hmm. Sorry for the visual, everybody. But with the dogs, like my daughter was like, "Are all those dogs dead?" And I was like, "Holy shit! They have 9 dead dogs on the wall." So when she moves to when she goes to their part of the world with the sisters, goes to their part of the world, and I jokingly said, "I bet you there's like 1 million dogs living in their world." And so as soon as it comes through, she's like, "Oh my God, there are like thousands of dogs." And I was like, I don't know why I knew that, but I just felt like that was going to be something. So my daughter goes straight from, "Oh, all these cute little dogs participating," to, "Daddy, why is that lady naked?"
Oh, right. The topless. There's like a topless scene almost.
And I have to explain art. I'm like, well, this is actually, a play on this. And, she's doing. And then when she strips, I was like, "Oh, see, she wasn't naked at all. It was just a costume." Like, thank God we don't have to have this discussion now. But no, it was funny watching her try and figure things out as far as like, who one of the dead kids is, and, what Whitey's role is. And she doesn't trust anything from the beginning. Like, we haven't had this discussion like, "Oh, this is a kid's horror movie." I just said, we're going to watch Coraline. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, she's like, "I don't like," not visual. I'm sorry, not verbally expressing, "I don't like this." It's kind of like, I don't trust that other family. I don't know what's going on. Because she's seen the Simpsons episode of Treehouse of Terror. But even then, it wasn't something like, "Oh, this is really going to skew me one way or the other." She saw it and she was kind of like, "No, something's off here." And I'm just watching her reactions to things and see if she's going to figure some things out. So I thought it was good to see it through those eyes, because I've seen Coraline in bits and pieces, but I didn't see it when it came out, because it was at that point where it's like, I'm not going to go see this kind of kids movie. One, because I think, James, you and I have had this discussion before. Like, certain types of animation I just find creepy.
Yeah.
And that was part of it for me with this movie, where it was the visuals were a little bit unsettling, but not disturbing. Kind of like with Enter the Spider-Verse, where they film certain aspects of the movie in one frame rate, and then the background is filmed in a different frame rate. And it's kind of that same, it's giving you anxiety about what's going on in the world and what's going on in the background and things like that. But I didn't get to ask her this question though, but I'm going to ask you guys because I wrote it down. What would be the alternate reality for either one of you as far as what Coraline is seeing? Because she's got this drab lifestyle. She doesn't seem like her parents are that engaged with her. Not that they dislike her, but it seems like she seems like a kid that is not a priority. And when she goes to the other world, she is the priority, to where it's what you want kind of at that age of like, I want my parents' attention. I want them to, I want to eat whatever I want. I don't want to eat this nasty, God, I forget. It wasn't kale. shoot.
Oh, the meals we're having?
Yeah. These slimy vegetables that my dad prepared because he's obviously not a cook. But what would it be for either one of you?
Well, I'm the guest. I guess I'll go first.
Sweet.
I was thinking like the times I was frustrated as a kid and when I might like wonder, grass is always greener, what's on the other side of things. It was usually at a birthday party where I felt like the way the birthday party was playing out wasn't what I envisioned like the perfect birthday party to be. I think I like to see other people having a good time, but I've created that scenario. Like with this movie, I'm not as drawn to the idea that there's all these little ways other mother like puts Coraline's name on something or has her be the center of attention. Like I don't really enjoy that specific thing, but I do like being the conductor of a scenario. So my version would be actually not just like me and my parents, but like a big party that was going really well. But everybody would have
mine is a world where I don't have to answer the question and the guest. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, at that age, man, I wanted to be free and be an adult and all those stupid ideas you have when you're a kid and somebody's already taking care of you and paying your bills. So mine would probably be like my own house, right? Like I get there and there's like just animals and me and I can do anything and all that. Like that would have really enticed me at that age. I never had a great relationship with my parents. So, but it also like wasn't like, super abusive or anything. So I don't know that another version of my parents would have appealed to me as much as you can go do whatever. So it'd be like just a house with my friends and animals and that kind of thing. That would have really done it for me. What about you, Don?
Oh my God.
Surprised by the question you asked again.
No. Not of that, because I'm trying. You did not give me the answer I was kind of expecting. I don't mean that you changed it, but you gave me a response I wasn't expecting. So I was thinking about that. Because you talked about how you were always traveling with your parents and stuff as a kid. And for me, it was always every couple of years, because my mom was in the military, like it was moving from place to place. And then the last place we settled was in Georgia, and I was like a preteen. So I think for me, it would have been, I don't know. I think for me, it would have been like not being noticed. Because when you're always the new kid and you're always having to, doing something that's different. Because I think when I first moved to Mississippi back in 87 or 88 or whatever it was a pain in the ass, because I just moved from Colorado. And I remember people I went to school with, they were like, you always talk about Colorado and you do this. I was like, because we had fucking snow and not as much racism. So, I'm not having to, worry about Klansmen marching in town. But I think for me, it would have been just like not being noticed. So I guess it kind of doubles with couples with what my superpower wish would be from when we talked about this earlier on an earlier episode, which was, invisibility. Maybe it would just be I'm not noticed as opposed to Coraline wanting to be noticed.
I think there's also something that this idea of like going from place to place. This movie, the way it resets the day she wakes up in her own bed. I feel like those little moments in this movie really stick in my memory as she looks around and kind of figures out which version she's in, because it starts to change over time. Like the rules of that are not always the same. That's such a thing for a kid, like that feeling of, if you have a sleepover, and you that moment when you wake up and realizing you're not at home, like there's almost a sense of second.
Okay.
There's something about that choice to have her always wake up back in her bed is this rebooting moment where she has to reassess who she is and kind of how she's kind of going forward. Because it always ends with a choice the night before, right? She's like, well, I can stay or I can return type of thing. This kind of empowering thing, like her choices, like developing her identity, like going through the story. And just y'all talking about like moving around a lot and waking up in different beds. It's like this movie is all in one place, but it is kind of about, waking up different places and the kind of disassociation you can have with that. Like Coraline really doesn't get a chance to like feel grounded anywhere. Everything's still like new and different, even at the end of this movie. I just think that's such like a thing for kids that if I was encountered this movie as a kid, I would probably watch it over and over again because it kind of speaks to that part of my brain. It like communicates with that.
Right.
You just hit something that I hadn't thought about at all that I think is fascinating now. When you're moving into a new house, you have all your stuff and the things that make you, but you get to decide how to display them or what you're going to put away and hide, or you get to get new stuff. And it becomes this piece of who you are, right? Like this is who I'm going to be in this place. This is where I'm trying to go now. And that's so central to Coraline's entire story of who do you want to be and who do you think you are. And I hadn't considered this at all, but the moving in aspect really builds on that because her room is constantly changing in the house because they're moving in and they're putting new stuff up or whatever. And that's just a fascinating new piece of symbolism I hadn't considered.
How would you both feel if you found a tiny doll that looked like you?
I'm going to answer for Don. Don would run like hell. And I'd be like, who made this stupid doll? It's too fat. No. All right, Don, go ahead.
My first indication would be, something's not right here. This is a little bit weird. It would not be like, oh, this looks just like me. And then go about my day. I know what that doll would mean based off my family history and history in general. So I wouldn't be.
Would you immediately panic that it's a voodoo doll?
Either that or like there's a really creepy person.
Yeah. Like it implies somebody's watching, really.
Yeah.
Like
here's how I think it would happen. I think Don would get the doll, send me a picture, and I'd say, dude, that looks just like you. Get the hell out of there. And then he'd write back and say, black people don't all look the same, James. That's racist. That's what I think would happen.
Yeah, I might do that.
So
it's possible.
No, that would creep me the hell out, man. Like if I didn't know where it was coming from, I would want nothing to do with this doll. So
right. And this idea of like the dolls and the sewing and all this stuff just lends itself to stop motion so well. Don, we were talking earlier about just the medium of stop motion and how kind of like weird and creaky and upsetting it can feel. Like it's not Valley of the Uncanny weird, like it's a different type of weird, I guess. But this story lends itself to like, oh, you want to make a doll creepy, render it in stop motion, and you got yourself the creepiest doll you could ever imagine. It's just like such a perfect pairing for the aesthetic of this story.
Oh, most definitely.
Well, we were talking earlier about Dawn's daughter getting like instantly like being unaware and unsettled. And I just want to shout out like Terry Hatcher's voice acting in this.
Oh, yeah.
Is so good. Like her humming is the other mother. Like when she's cooking, she's doing this like just an upsetting hum, and just the way she changes her voice and as she becomes more villainous throughout the story. Like she doesn't get bigger. She gets like quieter and smaller and calmer and more loving. It's just such a great performance. And it's so subtle too. Like it doesn't get played up as like best villains of all time, other mother, but like it's right up there. It's like so scary and inescapable in a way because it's loving you also, which it like draws you very good.
Well, and that's another great character trait because when you're younger or a teenager, you tend to notice these little tiny things that feel out of place. And as an adult, we will write off so much stuff. We're like, nope, not dealing with that. It doesn't matter if that's weird, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I really like how those little things are built in to creep you out, but they don't ruin the story if you don't notice them.
Right.
It just really enhances it if you do.
Right. I think as someone who like draws comics and there's so many layers, you know, I write a script, I thumbnail, I sketch, editors look at all these things before it even gets to any type of final art. I think there's something, this can happen with any type of like narrative craft, but you have if you play it right, you have all these opportunities to slide in little ideas that add those layers to it. And this movie is just so packed full of them. I just wonder why everybody must have just really enjoyed working on this project is how I feel. And I feel like that's the case with all the Leica movies. There's so much care and attention to detail and subtlety for a thing that doesn't necessarily require it to work, but you're glad it's there. It's just so beautiful, I guess is the only word for it. Like, I'll point out one specific thing that I had never noticed before, but I looked it up and found this. So Mr. Babinski, like the Russian who lives up on the top floor with the little flea circus, he's got this medal that's flapping on his shirt. I don't know if y'all noticed that. Did you notice that little medal? So if you look it up, I don't know if you looked it up, but that medal was apparently, and this is like internet hearsay, so maybe it's true. I didn't dig that deep. But this was a medal that was given to people that did cleanup at the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site in like the mid 80s. So it's like, and you're like, oh, that's a weird pairing. Is he blue because he's like radioactive or what? And then I was thinking, I'm like, well, maybe that was his brave moment. This movie's so much about Coraline becoming brave in her own way, standing up. I'm like, oh, maybe that's like a symbol of his past sense of bravery, which may or may not be true, but it's just one of those little things that I don't remember if that is in the book in a way, and it might be, and maybe it's all explained, but I was like, I love that there's just this little thing flapping on his chest that a kid could wonder about for years, and maybe.
Wow.
Well, not only that, but the fact that he's wearing it on his tank top while he's doing his exercise and stuff. So it's, I mean, there are people in the military, we would make jokes about, before there was like that thing about participation trophies or whatever it was. It's like, your National Defense Medal, like, you just get that for getting out of basic training. Like, there's right. And so you'll get made fun of if that's the only thing you have on your uniform, right? But there are people that will, understanding the medals and things like that, there are people that are extremely proud of rightfully so, that, on their car, they're like, oh, Bronze Star winner, Bronze Star recipient, Purple Heart, and of course, Congressional Medal of Honor, things like that. And they don't necessarily let you, most don't let you know, but you have people who will put those bumper stickers or the decals somewhere on their vehicle or computer or whatever, right? And let you know, where you kind of like, yeah, a lot of people get those. Not to disparage it, but like, a lot of people have gotten, not necessarily the Congressional Medal of Honor, but a lot of people get Purple Hearts because it's from an injury. There weren't as many people who would have been cleaning up Chernobyl compared to, with especially with American recent action in places like Afghanistan or Iraq. By comparison, you don't have as many people that would have been cleaning up Chernobyl. But then also what goes along with that, which is, it's not just the cleaning up, it's also the fact that you're preventing so many other people from getting sick and possibly dying.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
That sacrifice, and I'm glad you brought that, because I had completely forgotten to even look up the medal. But 2019, HBO had the limited series about Chernobyl, and they used they took some liberties with history, but they used a lot of accounts that people had as far as what they dealt with. And the miners, the guys who worked in it with coal mining, were used to shovel, to dig into the reactor to actually deal with preventing the meltdown, right? Or preventing a further meltdown. And those guys were extremely proud to do it, because it's like, it's not about us. Like, we're going to fucking die. We know this. We know what's going to happen, because there's one point in the miniseries where the inspector is admonishing the miners because they're not wearing protective gear. And one of the guys who's leading the miners is like, we know this stuff doesn't, it doesn't work. We know that this is something that all the stuff that you're giving us isn't going to do anything for us. Like, we know we're going to die.
Yeah.
We know what we're being exposed to. And when they do hand them out the medals, it's kind of like, no, it's not for me. It's to make sure that my kids don't have to deal with this shit. As far as having the radiation continue spreading. So I'm glad you brought that. I had completely forgotten about it.
Yeah, I think I was thinking specifically about that, and you're pulling it all together in a way that I'm like, that was totally worth animating, because it's not like it was just described in prose. It was like animated across like any scene that character is in, which is like a whole task.
Right.
So it has to have a good reason. So if you think about, we're talking about these ideas of like identity and like coming of age, grass is always greener on the other side in the other world. Like there's also this bigger story of the choices we make in moments of like conflict or fear. So there's the layering of that. Coraline first, she goes through the wall because she is brave, but it's brave into the unknown, which is a specific type of brave and a curiosity. But then she returns later with more knowledge, which makes her brave in a different way. And then she's even braver when she knows the full stakes of the situation, but returns, and then is even braver when she fights the other mother's hand at the end and decides to set the trap in the well to prevent anyone else from suffering the fate of the other kids. So it's like she covers basically all those stages you just kind of described of bravery and being rewarded at different tiers. Some are just by the circumstance, or some you seek out despite knowing like the danger. And that's really that next level of like the sacrifice thing. I think that stuff's all in there for kids to understand, but in the way like, war stories are so like engaging to know that people made choices like that.
Yeah. And there was someone, and I'm glad you brought up the bravery thing, or at least the connection with bravery, because someone was describing it. And again, I don't want to attribute it to the wrong person, but they basically said that, courage is not, not being scared. It's continuing to do whatever it is in the face of being scared. And I watched someone else describing, it was another war thing, where they were being asked by a kid, like, oh, how were you so brave? He's like, I wasn't brave. I was scared shitless. I didn't know what was going on, but I couldn't stop. I had to fight. I had to continue. I had to do this. And it might have been a Holocaust survivor. I'm trying to remember because it was a while ago, where they were talking about, it's like, yeah, I was scared, but I didn't have an alternative. The alternative was I was going to die. James, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the quote you're talking about was Nelson Mandela.
Well, I think it was more than him, because
that's the quote you're talking about. Okay, well that's just the one I know. So
okay,
yeah. All right. But
how dare you
ahead.
try to bring in black people to try?
And Ira's like, "Well, I gotta go, guys."
No, I'm loving this. Make me uncomfortable, please.
It's an ongoing war that's been going for like 179 episodes now.
The tension slowly tightening. The guitar string. This is something that I remember being in the book that I'm pretty sure doesn't pop up in the movie, but Coraline tells the cat a story about her dad in a hornet's nest, and how he sacrifices himself to get stung so she can get away, but he drops his glasses. He realizes that later, and he goes back for them. And Coraline, kind of talking to herself, basically is like, she realizes that's when he was the bravest, because he knew he made the choice to go back and retrieve the glasses, and facing the fear that he had already encountered. So it's all that stuff is there. And it's funny how the way that comes across in a book is of us in a certain way, project, there's a certain spotlight on it when a character tells an anecdote like that. Right. But I just love this movie because it can be so much more subtle. Maybe that whole idea is kind of wrapped up in a medal on a secondary character's tank top, right? Or it's it shows up in little ways. It's not there on the surface as much. And I feel like that's, for me, I would have to maybe put the movie in a slightly higher category than the book, only because it can do that for a young reader. It kind of asks more of you. I think, in a way, if you want to know more, there's a lot more than that kind of the straightforward plot and the parent thing and all that. There's like, there's more layers, and that's cool.
Oh, I like that, and I would totally put the movie over the book, and that's not a slight against the book at all. I enjoyed the book when I read it. It's just I feel like I said earlier, the animation of the other world and just different things, but even what you just said about being more subtle, I think that all just hits so much better for teens.
Right, yeah, kind of like it's interesting, like. Just thinking of the way, I don't know how much y'all think about this, but I don't have kids, but I make kids content, and the markets for that constantly shifting and becoming more clear and defined for the sake of like capitalism, because it's like, well, if people know what they're getting, they're more likely to buy it. So if we have like these subcategories, people don't have to stray into like dangerous spaces. Like when we were kids, we would just read Stephen King because that was there on a bookshelf, and that's just what I read when I was in fifth grade. I'm like, I guess I'm reading it because I don't know what else I'm supposed to be reading. But now there's so much breakdown of what's right for what age group, which is really good in some ways. But it's interesting with Coraline. Like I'm not sure. Like stories like this keep getting told, which is very cool. But I also wonder, like I haven't, like you mentioned the Clackety earlier, haven't read it yet. Sorry, Laura, I'm getting to it very soon. But
it's fantastic.
It's like this kind of wave of these dark fantasy. It seems like I wanted to see how people are doing it different than Coraline and kind of what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Because, Neil Gaiman being very famous gets to do more than authors that are not famous.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's something you learn, as a creative. You're like, no, I don't get to just make whatever I want. You have to kind of earn that reputation. Mm-hmm. But, I'd like to do a little research into like the stuff that came after Coraline and what it gets to get away with and what it doesn't. Because I just think that's kind of an interesting thing, especially with horror and like darker content. For a young audience.
Mm. Well, like I mentioned Wendell and Wild earlier, and of course Selleck made that and wrote the book with Clay McLeod Chapman, and then the book hasn't been released. But I feel like that has again taken a few steps somewhere else, and it's allowed to do more, like you were just talking about. So I'm fascinated by that as well now.
Yeah, I guess like thanks to like streaming services making like these more niche audiences, like Wendell and Wild can get more exposure than it otherwise would. Because I feel like so much of the Leica stuff for a long time, it would kind of go under the radar, like Paranorman or like Kubo and the Two Strings. Mm-hmm. Like the stuff kind of would come and go because it's just a little darker. Like not every parent is going to like take their kid to that movie. And then before you know it, it's like out of the theaters and everybody's sort of forgotten.
I wonder how much streaming has affected that, because before, like take a movie like 9, which is my double feature. We'll talk about that later. But 9 is one of those films that you don't know what the hell you're going to get. The trailers don't make any sense. And so I look at like the time when you had to go to the theater to see it, or you had to rent it or whatever else. And now you can plug it in, you can check it out a bit. If it's not working for your kid, you turn it off and you're out nothing but 15 minutes of time.
Right.
So I wonder how much streaming has allowed some of these stories to be told just from that aspect, as well as what you were just saying about Netflix giving them shots or whatever else.
I wrote down some quotes, and these, I don't know how to frame these, but I would just say like these hit me hard when it came to not viewing as a child, but viewing as an adult. And it was this quote: "We want what's best for you," from other mother, and it's in the same vein as when a child asks why, you say because I said so, or because I told you so, or whatever it is, right? It's hard to explain to a kid or to your child that, I'm doing this for your benefit. But then you watch this and you're like, this person isn't doing it for their benefit. This parent isn't doing it for the benefit of the child. They're doing it for the benefit of themselves. And it really makes you kind of internalize, like, is that what it means when I say it? So I know what's best for you. Is it me just trying to shut down the discussion of you need to do what I say because I am dad, because I am mom, because I'm grandma, grandpa, your favorite aunt, your favorite uncle. But do we really know? And it made me think about, even with COVID and, these patriot mommies or patriot moms or whatever they want to call themselves, like jumping on school boards. I'm like, no, we don't. We don't know what's best. We want what's best for them, but we don't know what's best for them, or at least we think we know. And the reality is, parenting it's a whole lot of making shit up as you go. I mean, mind you, Other Mother is a parasite, so it has a completely different meaning for her. But it did also make me think of, maybe that's why Coraline's parents aren't necessarily disengaged. It's kind of like, you'll figure it out, kid. Like, we don't need to be on your ass every 2 seconds to make sure that you're doing this or we're making you happy or doing whatever. Like, go explore, go play in the mud, go do this, go do that. As opposed to, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do so you have that attention, so you have that FaceTime. So you feel, I don't know, a little bit more secure.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, 'cause I was mentioning earlier that the movie starts by like the mom talking about a car accident. So it's like the real world is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than the other world. Because the other world, the characters are scary and menacing for like emotional effect. But if you came to terms with that, it's probably a safer space, but in the way that like a fishbowl is like a safe space for a fish and not the grand.
Nice.
It's kind of, it's like it's back to that idea of like the perception of the child and understanding what other people want and need from them, right? Like the other mother needs Coraline's love, but the way she manages it reminds me of in like Toy Story 2, like maybe one of my favorite movies of all time, the way the toys are cherished by the villain, right? Like that he wants to like put them in a perfect little box and save them forever, but also erase like Andy's name from Woody's foot. Like you kind of steal their identity to preserve them. It's like, it's interesting stuff for a kid to think about the way, and really important. Like I try to do this with my books. I always try to paint the adults is believable enough where you can understand how they feel about the kids, because that's so much of growing up is like you trying to understand your role amidst like all these adults. And this movie does that so well by painting these two highly contrasting sides. It just like it would, I would love to watch a kid watch this movie and sort of like see all that stuff maybe for like the first time. Not in a creepy way that I would watch a kid watch a movie, but like
right.
A studied way. Like
a focus group, a small little focus group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there'd be other people there. Yeah.
You're just in the corner with your clipboard taking notes. All right. Okay.
Other Mother only makes what it, to make stuff that was going to impress Coraline, right? Because she's watching her through the doll or surveilling her through the doll. Which, by the way, since we are in this holiday season, and I'm just going to say it, if you're still doing Elf on a Shelf with your kid, that's just weird.
I'm doing it. I'm going to send
no.
pictures every single day.
You do it in a different way. I mean, the people that are like, oh, don't touch the elf. You're raising your kid for a surveillance state. Please stop.
Yeah.
You have fun,
weird, right? Yeah.
You have fun with it. Like my thing is like the people who are like really going to punish their kids because the elf is there. Like you and your kid like have fun with it. It's like, oh, he got into the cookies. Oh, he did this. He did, you're doing silly stuff. I mean, the people who use it as like, oh, he's going to tell Santa on you. You're such a horrible. Oh, and I'm going to call Santa right now. And,
man.
Or the ones that go even further and have the fake police that they call and like, oh, you've been a bad kid. We're calling the police. Like, no, don't do that, please. So Other Mother has been surveilling, Coraline, so she knows what she wants, right? So that kind of goes back to we want what's best for you. She thinks that she knows what's best for her, wants what's best for her because it's going to get other mother what she wants out of this whole arrangement, right? And she knows that because she's been watching Coraline. And she's getting the visuals of whatever she's being neglected, or whatever neglect that she seems to see. So that's a long way to ask this question, which is, if it were other mother or other whoever it happens to be, what would it be that they would have to do to impress you? Since they're making things to impress you, to get you to stay. What is it that's going to entice you to stay in that world?
Is this me today or me as a teen or what?
Whenever.
Okay.
I'd prefer to hear today, but
today I believe that the portal would just open to Canada and I could move. I don't know.
Well, you're in Arizona. The tunnels go the other way.
Ouch. So true.
Oh, I think I have a real answer. Not that that's not a real answer also, James.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think just thinking about like the Terry Hatcher voice and sort of like the tone and the sense of understanding. And this is like very of the moment right now. So this isn't like painting my mother in a bad light, but I just put out a book that I mentioned at the top of the show, came out like a couple weeks ago. So of course I want to know what people think of it. And of course I would want no more than to know what my mother thinks of it. But I also like just put out a book last year and like she's seen a million other things I've made. So it's not like it's that exciting where she feels like she has to support me in the same way as a kid. But I think my other mother thing that would reel me in would be like, she would have just this sort of like deep connection and deep understanding of everything I make and then tell me about how good it is.
Okay.
You know, it's like all that work you put in, like I see all of it. Not just like, oh, it's cool. My friends love it too. They're talking about it on Facebook. They bought 8 copies. I'm like, I don't care about that stuff. Tell me, like, am I an artist? That would be my other mother thing. She would see that. And that I would stay there forever and just listen to them talk about me.
I love that. My mom would never do that. Even as other mother, she would still be like, it was fine. And that would be it. So.
Right.
No, she would probably say it was pretty fine. She would add a little something
side story for you. So, Don, when I released Fat Camp, my mother read it, right? And I started getting these texts, and it was never like, hey, this is good or bad or anything like that. It would just be random stuff. And my favorite one ever, she read the line jerkin' his gherkin. And she wrote me a text that I think I still have. And it just said, why would it be a gherkin? And I'm like, because it's a small pickle. And then there was just silence for like 2 hours. And then she wrote me again and she's like, still thinking about it. And I was like, gross. Why?
Wow.
So I think my other world mom would be one that doesn't text me those thoughts.
Yeah.
No, there just wouldn't be a 2-hour pause. That's what would happen.
So, Don, on this show, we often talk about your mom and how she watches movies and talks through them and gives you some great sound bites. What would other mother do? Like, would she do something similar, but like in your daily life? No. Or like, what would make it more fun?
Other mother would let me record it and stream it on like Twitch or something. My mom has don't you dare put me on social media. I'm like, damn it. You don't realize how people have been dying to see this.
I did notice that your mom didn't say, don't direct message James these thoughts and have James post them.
No, that's not part of it. She doesn't want to be recorded. Which is fun. Which is weird. She's been here 2 weeks and we have not watched a movie together.
Aw, sad.
Oh, no, nothing bad. It's just like, we've just been like chilling and hanging out and stuff. So yeah, I just realized today, because I've taken her to the airport tomorrow, I'm like, I didn't have you watch a movie and say something like, this is bullshit. That's unbelievable. That would never happen. You know, it was a good movie, but it was unbelievable. I mean, seriously, like, You just gotta let a cloud follow you around. I don't know what Jordan Peele was doing in this movie. I'm like, Mom, this movie was brilliant. I don't. Yeah, but the monkey went around and killed people, but he didn't kill the little boy. He killed everybody else. He would have killed everybody. I'm like, Mom.
I was literally going to say that we're doing Nope at the end of the month, and I hope that she gives us sound bites. So this is crazy.
You know what I'll try to do? I'll try to record her. I'll ask her a question about Nope, and I'll try to record her giving me the response, and we'll use it as audio.
That would be amazing. That would be the best gift to our listeners ever.
Other mother for me to entice me, she would just have to simply say, "Your dissertation's done," and I'd be like, "I'm staying here. I'm done. I'm not going back."
Oh, like she wrote it for you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, she wrote it, proofread it, edited it, copy edited it, got it published. She's like, yes, there were some things in here that I didn't necessarily agree with, but you know what? That's what historiography is about. Someone else will come along.
Coraline's real mother could help you out there because she's a copy editor.
Exactly.
Nice.
So you don't even need to go to the other world. The real world is your other world.
Yeah, but they want to make a catalog. I mean,
yeah, I love the catalog detail of the.
Which, by the way, there was this moment where, because I got confused and even got confused in my notes, because she was talking about Babinski. She was like, "Oh, he's a drunk," but she said it at the same moment the dad was getting out of the car, and the dad appeared to be drunk. And I was thinking, like, was she talking about because later on she talks about Babinski being a drunk. But I'm like, the dad looked heavily inebriated going into his meeting. So it's like he looked different when he went in. So I don't know if it was nerves or what was going on.
Yeah, the dad's got something going on. There's a weird. Just the voice acting in the Terry Hatcher works really well for me. A lot of the other voices, I'm like, sometimes they're so deadpan. I don't remember who's doing the dad. It's not like John. I know John Hodgman is in this somewhere, but I don't remember who he is. But like some of the other voices, they're
it's John Hodgman.
Oh, is it? Yeah. It's so like I guess kind of deadpan-ish that I'm not ever really certain about that character, which I guess is probably the point. But yeah, like you describing the way he comes out of that meeting, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot going on to that character that we're not getting any of that story at all.
I also want to throw in that Keith David does the voice of the cat, and that's just so exciting to me. I love that.
Look, I'll watch Keith David in anything. I mean, that's another Nope connection. But I was going to say that I love the Spink sisters, and I went and looked at the cast before I watched the film, and I was like, son of a bitch, you got me again. Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French play the sisters.
Yeah. And
they had for those of us who are a little bit older, they had a British comedy series show back in the 80s, 90s called French and Saunders. And then Jennifer Saunders went on to star. I think she produced and wrote it as well. Absolutely Fabulous, which I was addicted to in the 90s. You couldn't pull me away from Comedy Central when that was on a marathon. So I love that she gets introduced to a different audience with this film, or another generation with this film, because their comedy is just, I mean, the Spink sisters that you see, that was basically their comedy in those shows. Like, it was just kind of like, no, we're going to be a little bit rude. We're going to be a little bit crass. We're going to be a little oddball, but we're not, I mean, you can't compare us to Monty Python, because that's what anybody is going to typically say when you got British comedy, like, oh, they're the female Monty Python. They're not. They are French and Saunders, and their stuff is I would say, just like Monty Python, is timeless. You can go back and watch it. I mean, some stuff is aged because of politics and things like that, as far as like ridiculing politicians or whatever, but it still will get you, like, because it just like the scene where they're not dancing, but they're doing the performance, and almost living out the lives that they wanted as well. They're doing their performances, and you see all these dogs together, running the stage and the show and everything. And you kind of understand that they not necessarily crave the attention, but they want to let you know that they were somebody and they still matter. They don't want to be forgotten. So you kind of get some insight into who they are as well. Which again, I would love to see a real play by them like this with the mermaids and riding the clamshell and stuff like that. I could just imagine the inside jokes that they had when they were writing. Well, I'm sorry, when they were voice acting and talking together about these scenes. I could just imagine what was going on.
Yeah, it creates that weird sense that you sort of feel like you're in Britain, but we're actually in Oregon. So it's like that Neil Gaiman aspect of it, like bringing it to like the West Coast of the United States, that makes the whole setting feel a little odd. Because you look at it, you're like, okay, it kind of looks like Goonies, but it doesn't feel or sound like the Goonies.
Right.
It's great. It makes like this whole little location is just like this weird little island in the fog. This movie was made in a warehouse in Hillsboro, Oregon. Also, fun fact.
Huh. Did not know that it was made in Oregon.
Yeah, it won a bunch of that's where its first screenings were and stuff at like a Portland Film Festival, I think. So kind of an interesting origin for this movie, entering into the world.
All right, do you guys have anything left?
Shout out if you, just because being a visual artist, I want to shout out the concept art. You should look it up by a Japanese illustrator named Tadhiro Tsugi. I think I'm saying his name right. It's very good. It's very minimalist, retro 50s, 60s aesthetic, like gouache, high contrast color. There's a great illustration he did of the Pink Palace. Like the design of that building is so good, and it's just rendered in these purples and magentas against kind of a yellow background. James and I earlier were talking about, James is like, I wish there was a graphic novel, and there is one, but I wish graphic novel, or there was a second graphic novel done in this aesthetic. It would be very cool. And you can really see kind of the color influences, the way the tones sort of shift from the real world to the other world, like all these subtle little color language things are going on. So if you love the movie, look at the concept art, and it kind of brings forward a lot of that stuff, and the character designs too as well.
Very cool. All right, I guess that brings us to movie recommendations. So Ira, you're the guest. Would you like to tell people what they should watch if they enjoyed this film?
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to just recommend other features like Paranorman and Kubo and the Two Strings. But then as we were talking about this, I just started thinking of another story of a young protagonist entering into another world. And it made me think of Pan's Labyrinth.
I like that.
Yeah. And that would have been a great double feature. So I'm going to steal it. No, I'm just kidding. So I always do the double feature. Mine is 9, just because I love 9 and I feel like I've never met anyone else that's seen it. So I want people to see it. But yeah, that's me. Don, do you have 782 movies for us this week?
I should have texted you because I'm going to guess what your double feature is. It's going to be 9. Something told me, I'm like, it's going to be 9. It's going to be 9. All right. So out of the 8,472 films, you already mentioned Wendell and Wild. That was one that I definitely want to include. But Get Out, Ghost, the Patrick Swayze one, because there's that moment. There are a couple of moments that remind me of that film. The Ring, Willy Wonka, Matilda.
We talked about Willy Wonka a little bit ago.
Yeah, you did.
But I would even say Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because that again, I didn't realize that movie came out almost 20 years ago. I thought it was maybe 10.
Oh, totally. Yeah, this story has a real Roald Dahl flavor. That same kind of dark weirdness.
Hotel Transylvania and another Johnny Depp, which would be Edward Scissorhands. Beetlejuice. I skipped this one. Nightmare on Elm Street. One I would include. And then, I would say anything with Keith David in it is great. Especially when you hear his voice, it's a very distinguishable voice. You know him when you hear it.
Yeah.
But
so you're recommending kids kind of pair this with, like, say, like a Requiem for a Dream or something like that.
Well, I was going to say Nope, but actually, I missed a couple. I mean, there are other ones that you can include also for the visual aspect. Even the similar stories, things like Book of Life, Coco, Mitchell's versus the Machines would be another good one, because you still have that issue with family. And not fully understanding, coming of age story and trying to figure out who you are, and even break away from your family. Plus, you got a interesting situation with dogs in that movie as well.
All right. So Ira, that takes it back to you. Want to tell people where they can find you on social media and order your books?
Oh, sure. I guess I'm just at Ira Marcks at whatever social medias exist these days when you're listening to this, IRAMARCKS. And my books, Shark Summer and Spirit Week, are out wherever books are sold. Support your independent bookstore if you would, though, please. And I also have a podcast called Cartoon Feelings, where each week we talk about a animated feature or short and about the creative process behind it and what it takes and to make, a good cartoon come to life. So that's the stuff I'm doing.
Beautiful. I guess that wraps it up for another week. As always, I am James Sabata.
And I'm going to head back in that tunnel to see if that dissertation's ready.
And we will see you next week here at thenecronoma.com.
Unless we have buttons on our eyes.